In just 23 seconds, one of Hollywood's most respected actors would unleash a verbal assault so savage that it would leave Kelly Clarkson speechless, her production team scrambling, and viewers witnessing the most explosive meltdown in daytime television history. What started as light banter about Tom Hardy's latest project spiraled into a career-threatening confrontation that exposed the host's true colors and ended with security being called to the studio. The tension was palpable from the moment Hardy walked onto the brightly lit stage. Unlike the usual celebrity guests, who beam with practiced smiles and wave enthusiastically to the audience, the Venom star's demeanor was notably reserved. His jaw was set, his eyes focused, and there was an unmistakable edge to his presence that seemed to catch Clarkson off guard. "Tom Hardy, everybody," Clarkson announced with her signature over-the-top enthusiasm, but even her practiced charm couldn't mask the slight uncertainty in her voice. The audience applauded, but Hardy's acknowledgement was minimal. A brief nod, no wave, no smile. He settled into the guest chair with the controlled movements of someone who clearly didn't want to be there. "So good to have you here," Clarkson gushed, leaning forward with what appeared to be genuine excitement. "I have to say, you look absolutely fantastic. Have you been working out even more than usual?" Hardy's response was curt. "I look the same as I always do." The first crack in Clarkson's composure appeared as her smile faltered slightly. She quickly recovered, launching into her usual repertoire of questions about his upcoming film. But Hardy's answers remained clipped and professional. Where other guests would elaborate and share amusing anecdotes, he provided bare minimum responses that left awkward silences hanging in the air. "Your new movie, The Reckoning. It's getting incredible reviews," Clarkson pressed on, her voice climbing slightly higher as she tried to inject energy into the conversation. "Tell us about playing this tortured detective character." "It's a role. I played it. That's what actors do," Hardy replied, his tone growing noticeably cooler. The studio audience began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the warm, playful banter they were used to seeing on the show. Clarkson's handlers could be seen in the wings, exchanging worried glances and whispering urgently to each other. Sensing the interview slipping away from her, Clarkson made her first critical mistake. She decided to dig deeper into Hardy's personal life, apparently believing that pushing boundaries would create the kind of compelling television moment that generates social media buzz. "You know, Tom, you're known for being quite private. Some might even say mysterious," she said, with a knowing smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But our viewers love getting to know the real person behind the tough guy image. Can you tell us about your struggles with addiction? I know that's been a big part of your journey." The change in Hardy's demeanor was immediate and unmistakable. His entire body language shifted, shoulders tensing, hands gripping the armrests of his chair. The casual slouch disappeared, replaced by the coiled energy of someone preparing for a fight. "Excuse me?" Hardy's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more menace than if he had shouted. Clarkson, either oblivious to the warning signs or determined to push forward regardless, continued with what she clearly thought was sympathetic curiosity. "I mean, you've been open about your past struggles, and I think it's so inspiring how you've overcome them. Our audience would love to hear about that journey." "Would they now?" Hardy's eyes narrowed as he leaned forward slightly. "And what exactly do you think gives you the right to drag my personal struggles out for your audience's entertainment?" The studio fell silent. Even the camera operators seemed to freeze, unsure whether to keep rolling or cut away. Clarkson's face flushed as she realized she had crossed a line, but instead of backing down gracefully, she doubled down with the kind of misguided persistence that would soon prove to be her undoing. "Well, I just thought you thought wrong," Hardy cut her off, his voice still quiet but carrying the kind of authority that made everyone in the room stop breathing. "You thought you could ambush me with personal questions about the darkest period of my life because you needed better ratings?" Clarkson's mask finally slipped completely, Gone was the bubbly, caring host persona. In its place was something harder, more calculating. Look, Tom, this is how interviews work. People want to know about celebrities' lives. If you can't handle basic questions about things you've already discussed publicly, basic questions? Hardy's composure cracked just slightly, revealing the fury building underneath. You think addiction is a basic question for your afternoon entertainment show? The production team was now in full panic mode. Cameras continued rolling, but assistants were frantically gesturing from the sidelines. This was live television, and they were witnessing their host's carefully crafted image crumbling in real time. But Clarkson wasn't finished. Perhaps sensing that her reputation was already in jeopardy, she made the decision that would transform this from an uncomfortable interview into a complete disaster. Instead of apologizing or changing direction, she chose to attack. "I'm just trying to do my job here," she said, her voice taking on a defensive, almost petulant tone. "If you didn't want to talk about your life, maybe you shouldn't have agreed to come on a talk show." Hardy stood up slowly, his full height suddenly making him an imposing figure on the small stage. The audience gasped audibly, and even Clarkson seemed to realize that she had pushed too far. Hardy stood up slowly, his full height suddenly making him an imposing figure on the small stage. The audience gasped audibly, and even Clarkson seemed to realize that she had pushed too far. But the train had already left the station, and what came next would be even more explosive than anyone could have anticipated. "You want to know about addiction, Kelly?" Hardy's voice was no longer a whisper. It carried across the studio with the force of a man who had reached his breaking point. "You want to exploit my lowest moments for your ratings? Let me tell you exactly what addiction looks like." The color drained from Clarkson's face as she realized she had awakened something far more dangerous than an upset celebrity. This wasn't going to be a simple apology and move on situation. Hardy began pacing in the small space beside his chair, his movements controlled but radiating barely contained fury. "Addiction is waking up every morning, wanting to die, because you can't face another day clean," Hardy continued, his voice growing louder with each word. "It's losing everything that matters to you because a bottle or a needle seems more important than your family, your career, your fucking soul." The network censors were having a meltdown, but the live broadcast continued. There was no commercial break, no pause, just raw, unfiltered emotion pouring out of one of Britain's most private actors. "But you don't want to talk about that part, do you, Kelly?" Hardy turned to face her directly, pointing an accusatory finger in her direction. "You want the sanitized inspirational version where I smile and say how grateful I am for hitting rock bottom because it made me stronger." Clarkson tried to interject, her media training kicking in as she attempted damage control. "Tom, I think we should—" "No, you don't get to control this anymore." Hardy cut her off with such force that she actually recoiled in her chair. "You opened this door. You demanded I perform my trauma for your audience's entertainment. So let's give them what they really came for." The studio was dead silent, except for Hardy's voice echoing off the walls. Camera operators were getting hand signals from the production booth, but nobody seemed to know whether to cut away or keep recording what was turning into television history. "You sit there in your perfect little bubble," Hardy continued, his anger now fully unleashed. "Judging people, dissecting their pain, turning their worst moments into content for your show. Do you have any idea what it's like to rebuild your life from nothing? To have to prove every single day that you're more than the worst thing you've ever done?" Clarkson's carefully constructed persona was crumbling in real time. Gone was the warm, relatable host America had fallen in love with. In her place sat someone who looked genuinely scared, but also angry at being called out so publicly. "I was trying to be supportive," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Your story could help people who are struggling with similar issues." Hardy laughed, but there was no humor in it. The sound was bitter and harsh, causing several audience members to visibly flinch. "Supportive?" he repeated, his tone dripping with contempt. "You ambushed me with the most painful period of my life Because you thought it would make good television. That's not support. That's exploitation. The production team was in chaos. Assistants were running back and forth, phones were buzzing with calls from network executives, and the show's producers were having heated whispered conversations in the wings. But the cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of the most explosive interview in daytime television history. Clarkson's desperation was becoming more apparent with each passing second. She could feel her career, her carefully cultivated image, slipping away with every word Hardy spoke. And in that desperation, she made the second critical mistake that would seal her fate. "Look, you're being completely unreasonable," she said, her voice taking on a defensive, almost whiny quality. "Every celebrity talks about their personal struggles on talk shows. It's part of the job. If you can't handle that level of basic professional interaction, maybe you shouldn't be in this business." The studio fell so quiet, you could hear the mechanical hum of the cameras. Hardy stopped pacing and turned to stare at Clarkson with an expression that made several crew members take involuntary steps backward. When he spoke again, his voice was deadly calm. "Did you just tell me that discussing my addiction is a basic professional requirement?" Each word was carefully enunciated, delivered with the precision of someone who wanted to make absolutely certain they were understood. Clarkson seemed to realize she had made a terrible mistake, but instead of backing down, her own anger and embarrassment drove her to double down once again. "I'm saying that if you agree to come on a talk show, you should expect to talk," she snapped, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking completely. "This isn't some art house interview where we discuss your motivation and technique. This is daytime television. People want to know about your life." "My life?" Hardy's voice rose to match hers. "You mean my pain? You mean the nights I spent wanting to put a gun in my mouth because the shame was too much to bear? You mean the friends who died because they couldn't find their way back from the same place I barely escaped from?" The raw emotion in his words hit the studio like a physical force. Several audience members were openly crying, and even some of the hardened crew members looked visibly shaken. But Hardy wasn't finished. "That's what you want me to package up in neat little sound bites for your audience's consumption," he continued, his voice now carrying the weight of years of suppressed anger and frustration. "You want me to smile and make it palatable so suburban housewives can feel better about their own problems." Clarkson was now fully on the defensive, her media persona completely abandoned. "That's not fair, and you know it. I help people every day with this show. I've had plenty of guests talk about addiction, and it's been helpful for viewers." "Helpful?" Hardy's voice cracked with incredulous rage. "You think turning someone's rock bottom into entertainment is helpful? You think exploiting their vulnerability for ratings is some kind of public service?" The confrontation had reached a point where neither party could back down without losing face completely. The studio audience was witnessing something unprecedented. Two celebrities in a death match of words, with no script, no safety net, and no way to take back what had already been said. What happened next would determine not just the end of this interview, but potentially the end of careers. Hardy took a step closer to Clarkson's desk, his presence now completely dominating the small stage. "You know what the real tragedy is, Kelly? You had a platform. You had influence. You could have used it to actually help people instead of turning their pain into a fucking sideshow." Clarkson's face flushed red, with a mixture of embarrassment and rage. The mask was completely off now, revealing someone far different from the beloved daytime host millions of viewers thought they knew. "Don't you dare lecture me about helping people," she shot back, her voice rising to match his intensity. "I've been doing this for years. I've helped more people than you could ever imagine. Just because you can't handle a simple conversation about your past doesn't mean I'm the problem here." The audience collectively gasped at her words. Even her most devoted fans in the crowd seemed stunned by the callousness of her response. Hardy's eyes narrowed to slits, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the kind of quiet menace that made everyone in the studio freeze. "A simple conversation?" he repeated slowly. You think ambushing someone with questions about the darkest period of their life on live television, without warning, is a simple conversation? Oh, please, Clarkson scoffed, her desperation now manifesting as aggressive dismissal. You're an actor. This is what you signed up for when you became famous. If you wanted privacy, you should have become an accountant. That was the moment everything exploded. Hardy's carefully maintained control finally snapped completely. You heartless fucking bitch, he snarled, his voice carrying such raw fury that several audience members audibly gasped. You sit there in your designer dress, collecting your paycheck from other people's misery, and you have the audacity to tell me what I signed up for? The studio erupted in chaos. Production assistants were shouting into their headsets, security guards were moving toward the stage, and Clarkson herself looked like she had just been slapped across the face. How dare you speak to me like that? She stammered, her voice shaking with a mixture of shock and indignation. This is my show. You can't talk to me like that on my own show. Your show? Hardy laughed bitterly. This cesspit of manufactured drama and emotional exploitation? You're right, Kelly. This is exactly your show. A perfect reflection of who you really are. He turned to address the cameras directly, his voice now carrying the authority of someone who had completely seized control of the narrative. You want to know what addiction really looks like? He said, staring directly into the lens. It looks like people who prey on vulnerability for entertainment. It looks like turning human suffering into content. It looks like what you just witnessed here today. The comparison hit Clarkson like a physical blow. Her face went white, and for a moment she seemed genuinely speechless. But her wounded ego wouldn't let her stay silent for long. Get him out of here, she said to her security team, her voice cracking with barely contained emotion. Get him off my stage right now. 2 large security guards began moving toward Hardy, but he held up a hand to stop them. Don't worry, he said, his voice now calm, but still carrying an edge that made everyone in the room nervous. I'm done here. I've said what needed to be said. He looked back at Clarkson one final time, and his next words would become the most quoted moment from the entire confrontation. You know what the difference is between my addiction and yours, Kelly? I got clean. The studio fell dead silent. Clarkson's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. The devastating simplicity of Hardy's final blow had left her completely defenseless. Hardy straightened his jacket and began walking toward the exit, but he paused at the edge of the stage and turned back to address the stunned audience. To anyone watching who's struggling with addiction or depression or any kind of pain, he said, his voice now gentle but still carrying enormous weight, your story belongs to you. Don't let anyone turn it into entertainment without your permission. You're worth more than that. With that, he walked off the stage and disappeared into the wings, leaving behind a studio in complete chaos. Clarkson sat frozen in her chair, her career in ruins, her carefully crafted image destroyed in less than 20 minutes of live television. The cameras continued rolling for several more seconds, capturing her shocked expression and the stunned silence of the audience, before finally cutting to an emergency commercial break. By the time they returned, Hardy was already gone, having left the building without speaking to anyone else. In those final moments before the show cut away, viewers witnessed something unprecedented in daytime television history: the complete and total destruction of a host's credibility, delivered with surgical precision by an actor who had been pushed too far. The internet would explode with clips and commentary within minutes, but nothing would capture the raw power of watching it happen in real time. Kelly Clarkson's show would never recover from that afternoon. Tom Hardy, meanwhile, had proven that sometimes the most powerful response to exploitation isn't silence. It's speaking the truth so clearly and forcefully that no one can pretend they didn't hear it.